When Sarah thought her marriage was over and her husband had chosen his secretary over 15 years of devotion, she never imagined that one phone call would reveal a secret that would turn her world upside down. What happened next didn't just change her life. It made the man who abandoned her come crawling back, begging for forgiveness he would never receive. Sarah Mitchell had always believed that love was enough. At 32, she had spent the last 15 years of her life building what she thought was an unshakable foundation with her husband Michael. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. They had met in college when she was just 17, young and idealistic, ready to give her whole heart to the charming business major who made her laugh until her sides hurt, and promised her a lifetime of adventures together. Those early years had been magical. Michael was ambitious and driven, qualities that drew Sarah to him like a moth to flame. She supported his dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, working multiple part-time jobs to help pay for his MBA while she put her own education on hold. When he landed his first job at Morrison Associates, a prestigious consulting firm downtown, Sarah felt like they were finally on their way to the life they had planned together. She took a position as an elementary school teacher, work that filled her soul even if it didn't fill their bank account the way Michael's career eventually would. Every morning she would wake up early to pack his lunch, iron his shirts, and send him off to work with a kiss and encouragement. Every evening she would listen to his stories about difficult clients and office politics, celebrating his victories as if they were her own, and consoling him through his setbacks. For 15 years, this had been their rhythm. Sarah poured herself into their marriage with the same dedication she brought to her classroom. She planned their vacations, managed their household, hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, and smiled graciously through countless corporate events where she felt like an outsider among the wives who spoke of shopping trips to Europe and summer homes in the Hamptons. Michael's career flourished under her unwavering support. He climbed from junior associate to senior partner, his salary growing exponentially with each promotion. They moved from their tiny starter apartment to a modest house in the suburbs, then to a larger home in an upscale neighborhood. Sarah had suggested they start a family multiple times over the years, but Michael always had a reason to wait. First, he needed to establish himself at the firm. Then he needed to make senior associate. Then partner. There was always another goal, another milestone that had to come first. Sarah told herself that his ambition was admirable, that their time would come. She channeled her maternal instincts into her students, staying late to help struggling readers and spending her own money on classroom supplies. Her principal often praised her dedication, and parents frequently requested her for their children. Teaching wasn't making her rich, but it was making a difference, and that had always been enough for Sarah. What she didn't realize was that while she was building their life, Michael was building another one entirely. It started with small changes that Sarah initially attributed to work stress. Michael began working later hours, often not coming home until well after dinner. He became more secretive about his phone, taking calls in another room and keeping his device face down during their conversations. He grew impatient with her stories about her students and seemed distracted during the few evenings they spent together. Sarah tried to be understanding. Michael's firm was expanding, taking on bigger clients and more complex projects. As a senior partner, he carried significant responsibility. She made his favorite meals and left them in the refrigerator for when he finally came home. She gave him space when he seemed overwhelmed and offered gentle support when he appeared stressed. The truth began to unravel on a Thursday evening in late October. Sarah had left school early due to a teacher's workshop being canceled and decided to surprise Michael with dinner at his favorite restaurant downtown. She knew he had been working incredibly hard on a new client acquisition, and she thought a romantic evening might help them reconnect. She dressed carefully in the navy blue dress he had complimented her on during their anniversary dinner, applied her makeup with extra care, and drove to his office building with excitement bubbling in her chest. It had been months since they had enjoyed a spontaneous date night, and she was looking forward to seeing the smile on his face when she surprised him. The elevator to the 15th floor seemed to take forever. Sarah checked her reflection in the polished doors and smoothed her hair, practicing the casual way she would suggest they slip away for an early dinner. She imagined Michael's arms around her, the way he used to hold her when they were younger, before work and responsibilities had created such distance between them. The reception area of Morrison Associates was elegant and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and modern artwork that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. The receptionist had already left for the day, but Sarah knew her way to Michael's corner office. She had visited enough times over the years for company parties and brief lunch meetings. As she walked down the hallway, she could hear voices coming from behind Michael's partially closed door. She recognized his laugh immediately, that deep, genuine sound that had first attracted her to him in their college coffee shop all those years ago. But there was something different about it now, something intimate and warm that she hadn't heard directed at her in a very long time. Sarah slowed her steps, suddenly uncertain. Through the gap in the door, she could see Michael's desk, and her heart began to pound as the scene before her came into focus. Michael was leaning back in his leather chair, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Perched on the edge of his desk was a woman Sarah recognized as Jennifer Walsh, Michael's secretary for the past 2 years. Jennifer was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall and willowy, where Sarah was petite and soft. Sophisticated, where Sarah was approachable. Polished, where Sarah was natural. Her long blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her fitted black dress probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. She was laughing at something Michael had said, her manicured hand resting on his arm in a gesture that was far too familiar, far too intimate for a professional relationship. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as she watched Michael reach up to tuck a strand of Jennifer's hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The tenderness in the gesture, the look in his eyes, the way Jennifer leaned into his touch, it told Sarah everything she needed to know about what had been happening during all those late nights at the office. She must have made a sound, because suddenly both Michael and Jennifer were looking toward the door. Michael's face went white when he saw Sarah standing in the hallway, and Jennifer had the grace to look embarrassed as she quickly moved away from the desk and smoothed down her dress. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" The question hit her like a physical blow. What was she doing here? She was surprising her husband of 15 years with a dinner invitation. She was trying to reconnect with the man she had devoted her entire adult life to supporting and loving. She was being the same, thoughtful, caring wife she had always been. "I thought we could have dinner," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been working so hard lately, and I thought—" "This isn't a good time," Michael interrupted, running his hand through his hair in the nervous gesture she knew so well. "I'm in the middle of something important with Jennifer." The way he said Jennifer's name, with a protective edge that he had never used when speaking about Sarah to others, made her stomach turn. She looked at the woman who had been nothing more than a voice on the phone when she called Michael's office, now seeing her as the person who had been receiving all the attention and affection that should have been hers. "I see that," Sarah said quietly. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Jennifer cleared her throat and gathered some papers from Michael's desk. "I should go," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "We can finish discussing the Henderson account tomorrow, Michael." As Jennifer walked past Sarah toward the door, she paused for just a moment. "Sarah, isn't it?" she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Michael talks about you sometimes. It's nice to finally meet you." The dismissal in her tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah was someone Michael mentioned occasionally, a peripheral figure in his real life, which apparently revolved around late nights and intimate conversations with his beautiful secretary. After Jennifer left, Michael and Sarah stood looking at each other across the expanse of his office. The silence was deafening, filled with all the words that needed to be said and all the truths that could no longer be ignored. "How long?" Sarah asked finally. Michael loosened his tie completely and sat down heavily in his chair. "Sarah, it's not what you think." "How long, Michael?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much truth he could get away with revealing. 6 months, he said finally. "But nothing physical happened until recently, I swear." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 6 months. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. 6 months of lies. Of late nights that weren't about work. Of distance that wasn't about stress. 6 months of her making his favorite meals and ironing his shirts and supporting his career while he was falling in love with someone else. Are you in love with her? The question came out stronger than Sarah felt. Michael was quiet for so long that Sarah knew the answer before he spoke. "Yes," he said finally. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant for this to happen." The apology felt hollow, meaningless. He was sorry it happened, but he wasn't sorry enough to end it. He was sorry she had found out, but he wasn't sorry enough to choose his wife of 15 years over his secretary of 2. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded when everything inside her was screaming. Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that were beginning to twinkle in the growing dusk. "I think we both know our marriage has been over for a while," he said without looking at her. "We've been living like roommates, not like husband and wife. Jennifer makes me feel alive again, makes me remember who I used to be before I got bogged down in routine and responsibility." Routine and responsibility. That's what their 15-year marriage had become to him. Sarah thought about all the ways she had tried to keep their connection alive, all the small gestures and acts of love that he had apparently seen as burdens rather than gifts. "I'll move out this weekend," Michael continued, finally turning to face her. "We can work out the details later, but I think it's best if we make this as clean as possible." Clean! As if 15 years of marriage could be swept away without mess or complications. As if Sarah's heartbreaking in real time was just an inconvenience to be managed efficiently. "Fine," Sarah said, because there was nothing else to say. She couldn't beg him to stay, couldn't fight for a man who had already given his heart to someone else. "I'll be staying at my sister's this weekend so you can get your things." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Does Jennifer know you're married?" "Of course she knows," Michael said, and there was a defensive edge to his voice. "She knows our marriage has been over in everything but name for years." Sarah nodded and walked away, leaving behind the man she had loved since she was 17 years old and the life she had thought was unshakable. As the elevator descended to the ground floor, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished doors. She looked exactly the same as she had when she arrived, full of hope and excitement, just 20 minutes earlier, but everything had changed. She drove home in a daze, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The house that had been her sanctuary suddenly felt like a museum of her failed marriage. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every small decoration told the story of a life that had apparently been an illusion. Sarah sat in her living room that night, still wearing the navy blue dress that was supposed to have been perfect for a romantic dinner, and tried to figure out what came next. At 32, she was starting over completely. She had no savings of her own, having always contributed her teacher's salary to their joint account that Michael managed. She had no career beyond teaching, having never pursued the graduate degree she had planned because Michael's education had taken priority. She had built her entire adult life around being Michael's wife, and now she was nobody's wife at all. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work and spent the day in bed, alternating between crying and staring at the ceiling. Her sister Emma called twice, but Sarah let it go to voicemail. She wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet, wasn't ready to make it real by telling someone else. By evening, she forced herself to get up and make a cup of tea. As she sat at the kitchen table, she thought about all the signs she had missed or chosen to ignore. The way Michael had stopped asking about her day. The way he no longer complimented her appearance or surprised her with small gifts. The way their conversations had become purely functional, focused on schedules and household maintenance rather than dreams and feelings. She had been so busy being the perfect, supportive wife that she hadn't noticed her husband falling out of love with her. She had been so focused on their future together that she hadn't seen him building a different future with someone else. The phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. The caller ID showed Michael's name, and for a moment her heart leaped with the irrational hope that he was calling to say he had made a terrible mistake, that he wanted to come home and work things out. "Hello," she answered. "Sarah, we need to talk about practical matters," Michael said without preamble. "I've spoken to my lawyer, and he's drawing up separation papers. I think we should try to handle this amicably." Amicably. As if there was a friendly way to dismantle 15 years of marriage. "What about the house?" Sarah asked, looking around at the home they had chosen together, the mortgage they had both signed. "We'll have to sell it," Michael said matter-of-factly. "With the market the way it is, we should be able to clear the mortgage and split what's left. It won't be much after real estate fees and closing costs." Sarah realized that Michael had already thought through all the logistics, had probably been planning this conversation for weeks or even months. While she was processing the emotional devastation of their marriage ending, he was efficiently cataloging assets and calculating divisions. "What about me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she wanted to show. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean? I mean, what am I supposed to do, Michael? I don't have any money saved. I make $38,000 a year teaching. I can't afford to live on my own." "You'll figure it out," he said, and the casual dismissal in his voice was almost worse than the affair itself. "You're smart and capable. You'll land on your feet." After he hung up, Sarah sat in the growing darkness of her kitchen and realized that the man she had loved for 15 years, the man she had sacrificed her own dreams to support, genuinely didn't care what happened to her now that he no longer needed her. She was completely and utterly alone, with no resources and no plan, facing the collapse of everything she had built her identity around. For the first time since discovering the affair, Sarah allowed herself to cry. Not the shocked tears of betrayal, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had lost not just her marriage, but her entire sense of self. What Sarah didn't know was that everything was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. 3 weeks after Michael moved out, Sarah was surviving on frozen dinners and the kindness of her sister Emma, who had been bringing groceries and checking on her daily. The divorce papers had arrived by courier, clinical and cold, reducing 15 years of marriage to a list of assets to be divided and debts to be settled. Sarah had signed them with a trembling hand, officially ending the only adult relationship she had ever known. She had returned to work, mechanically going through the motions of teaching while her personal life crumbled around her. Her students seemed to sense something was wrong, offering her extra hugs and handmade cards that made her cry in the supply closet during lunch breaks. The principal had pulled her aside to ask if everything was all right, and Sarah had managed to deflect with vague mentions of personal challenges. The house was already listed with a real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Brenda who kept emphasizing what a great investment property it would make for the right buyer. Sarah nodded along to discussions about staging and curb appeal, feeling like she was planning her own funeral. Every showing meant she had to disappear for hours, wandering through coffee shops and bookstores like a ghost haunting her former life. Michael had wasted no time making his new relationship public. Sarah learned from a mutual friend that he and Jennifer had been spotted at several upscale restaurants around town, and social media photos showed them at company events where Jennifer now appeared as his official +1. The speed with which he had replaced her was breathtaking and humiliating. On a rainy Thursday evening, as Sarah sat grading papers at her kitchen table and trying to ignore the realtor's lockbox hanging on her front door, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with an area code she didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Sarah Mitchell?" The voice was crisp and professional, with a slight accent Sarah couldn't place. "Yes, this is Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, my name is Victoria Sterling. I'm a partner at Whitman, Sterling & Associates. We're a law firm based in Manhattan, and I need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your family's estate." Sarah frowned, shifting the phone to her other ear. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person. My family doesn't have an estate." "You are Sarah Elizabeth Chen Mitchell, daughter of David and Linda Chen?" The use of her maiden name sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, just 2 years after she and Michael had started dating. She had been an only child, and their deaths had left her completely alone in the world except for Michael. It was one of the reasons she had clung so tightly to their relationship, desperate not to lose the only family she had left. "Yes, that's me," Sarah said slowly. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm calling because we've been trying to locate you for several months. Your parents were clients of our firm, and there are some significant matters that require your immediate attention. I'm afraid this isn't something we can discuss over the phone. Would it be possible for you to come to our offices in Manhattan? We can arrange travel and accommodations." "I don't understand," Sarah said, her heart beginning to race. "My parents died 13 years ago. Their will was settled. There was nothing left except some personal belongings and a small life insurance policy." "I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate, Ms. Mitchell. There are some things about your parents' financial situation that weren't disclosed at the time of their death, for legal reasons that I'll explain when we meet. This is quite urgent, and I really do need you to come to New York as soon as possible." Sarah felt dizzy. "What kind of things?" The kind that will change your life completely, Victoria said gently. Miss Mitchell, your parents were extraordinarily wealthy people who went to great lengths to protect their assets and ensure their daughter's future. The provisions they made are now ready to be executed, but only with your direct involvement. The words didn't make sense. Sarah's parents had been middle-class people who worked hard for everything they had. Her father had been an accountant for a small firm, and her mother had managed a local bookstore. They had lived modestly, saved carefully, and never gave any indication that they possessed significant wealth. There has to be some mistake, Sarah whispered. There's no mistake. Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand that this phone call is going to change everything for you. But I cannot proceed with any explanations until you're here in person. The legal protections your parents put in place require absolute confidentiality and security. 2 days later, Sarah found herself on a plane to New York, using a ticket that Victoria Sterling's firm had purchased for her. She had told her principal she needed emergency personal time and asked Emma to check on the house while she was gone. She hadn't mentioned anything about lawyers or estates, partly because she didn't understand it herself, and partly because she was afraid to hope that this might be real. The law offices of Whitman, Sterling, and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming Manhattan skyscraper. The reception area was more luxurious than any place Sarah had ever been, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. When she gave her name to the receptionist, she was immediately escorted to an elevator and taken to the 42nd floor. Victoria Sterling was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She was a petite woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of handling matters of enormous importance. Her office overlooked Central Park, and Sarah found herself momentarily distracted by the view before Victoria's voice brought her back to reality. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming so quickly. Please, have a seat. Victoria gestured to a comfortable leather chair across from her desk. I know this must be very confusing for you. That's an understatement, Sarah said, settling into the chair. I keep thinking there's been some terrible mistake. Victoria opened a thick file folder and removed several documents. Your parents, David and Linda Chen, were not who they appeared to be. They were, in fact, members of one of the wealthiest families in Asia. Your father was the heir to a business empire worth billions of dollars. Sarah stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. My father was an accountant. Your father was indeed an accountant, but that was the profession he chose after he walked away from his family's business empire at the age of 25. He fell in love with your mother, who came from a very different background, and his family disapproved of the match. Rather than give up the woman he loved, your father chose to give up his inheritance and live as an ordinary person. Victoria pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. It showed a much younger version of Sarah's father standing next to an elderly Asian man in front of what appeared to be a massive corporate headquarters. The family resemblance was unmistakable, but Sarah had never seen this photograph before in her life. Your grandfather, Shen Wei-ming, was devastated when your father left, but he never stopped hoping that his son would return. When your parents died, your grandfather was already quite elderly and in poor health. He passed away 2 years later, but not before making provisions for you. What kind of provisions? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Victoria smiled. Your grandfather left everything to you. The entire Chen family fortune, held in trust until your 33rd birthday, or until you faced a significant life crisis that required financial intervention. He wanted to ensure that you had the choice your father never gave you, the choice to live as an ordinary person or to claim your heritage. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. How much money are we talking about? The trust is currently valued at approximately $12 billion. The number was so large that Sarah couldn't comprehend it. $12 billion. It was more money than she could imagine spending in 100 lifetimes. It was the kind of wealth that appeared in headlines about tech moguls and oil barons, not in the life of an elementary school teacher from suburban America. This can't be real, Sarah said, gripping the arms of her chair. It's very real, Ms. Mitchell. Your grandfather's instructions were very specific. The trust was to remain secret until you either reached your 33rd birthday or experienced what he termed a great betrayal or abandonment. that threatened your security and well-being. Our firm has been monitoring your life from a distance, and when we learned of your recent divorce and financial difficulties, we determined that the conditions for early release had been met. Victoria pulled out another document, this one bearing official seals and signatures. This is the trust documentation. Once you sign these papers, you will have immediate access to a personal account containing $50 million for immediate needs. The remainder of the trust will be transferred to your control over the following 30 days. Sarah stared at the papers without seeing them. Why didn't my parents tell me? Why did they let me believe we were just ordinary people? According to your grandfather's notes, your father wanted you to understand the value of a simple life, to appreciate work and love and human connection without the complications that extreme wealth can bring. He planned to tell you everything when you turned 25, but the accident happened first. And my grandfather? Why didn't he contact me directly? Victoria's expression softened. Your grandfather was a proud man who respected his son's choices, even when he disagreed with them. He didn't want to interfere in the life your parents had chosen for you. But he also couldn't bear the thought of his family line ending in poverty or struggle. The trust was his compromise, a safety net that would only appear when you truly needed it. Sarah thought about the timing. Her 33rd birthday was still 8 months away, but the divorce had triggered the early release clause. Her grandfather had somehow anticipated that she might face betrayal or abandonment and had made provisions to protect her. What happens if I don't want it? Sarah asked. Then the money goes to various charities your grandfather designated. But Ms. Mitchell, I should mention that there are also provisions for justice. Justice? Victoria's smile turned slightly predatory. Your grandfather was a businessman who understood that wealth could be used not just for comfort but for correction. The trust includes specific allocations for addressing wrongs committed against you. If someone has betrayed or harmed you, the trust can be used to ensure appropriate consequences. Sarah thought about Michael, now living comfortably with Jennifer, having discarded 15 years of marriage without a second thought. She thought about how casually he had dismissed her financial concerns, how little he seemed to care about what happened to her after he walked away. I need time to think about this, Sarah said. Of course. But Ms. Mitchell, I should mention that your ex-husband, has been making some interesting financial moves lately. Our investigators have uncovered some information that might interest you. Victoria opened another folder. Michael Mitchell has been liquidating assets and moving money in ways that suggest he's preparing for a very comfortable future with his new girlfriend. He's also been telling people that you'll be receiving a significant settlement from the divorce, which is curious since the paperwork shows he's leaving you with virtually nothing. Sarah's stomach clenched. What do you mean? It appears that Mr. Mitchell has been systematically hiding assets throughout your marriage. The consulting firm he works for, he actually owns a significant stake in it, purchased with money that should have been considered marital property. The house you're being forced to sell? He's arranged for a business associate to purchase it at below market value, with plans to sell it back to him after the divorce is finalized. The betrayal went even deeper than Sarah had realized. Michael hadn't just abandoned her emotionally, he had been actively working to ensure she was left with nothing, while he and Jennifer started their new life with hidden wealth. He's been planning this for a long time, Victoria continued. The affair with his secretary was just the emotional justification for a financial strategy he's been implementing for at least 2 years. Sarah felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Michael hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He had systematically stolen from her while pretending to be her devoted husband. Ms. Mitchell, Victoria said gently, your grandfather's trust includes provisions for exactly this kind of situation. Would you like to hear about them? For the first time since entering the office, Sarah smiled. Yes, I think I would. 2 hours later, Sarah walked out of the law office with a titanium credit card connected to an account containing $50 million and a detailed plan for what Victoria Sterling delicately termed corrective measures. The remaining billions would follow, but $50 million was more than enough to begin rebuilding her life and ensuring that Michael faced consequences for his deception. Her first stop was to a boutique hotel where she booked the penthouse suite for a week. Her second stop was to a high-end clothing store where she purchased an entirely new wardrobe. By evening, Sarah Mitchell looked like a completely different person, confident, elegant, and possessed of the quiet power that came from unlimited resources. She spent the next 3 days in New York, meeting with financial advisors, private investigators, and legal experts who specialized in complex marital fraud cases. By the time she boarded the plane back home, Sarah had a comprehensive understanding of her new reality and a detailed plan for introducing Michael to his. As the plane lifted off from JFK Airport, Sarah looked down at the city lights below and thought about her parents, who had given up unimaginable wealth for love, and her grandfather, who had ensured that wealth would return to protect their daughter when she needed it most. Michael had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to learn that abandoning Sarah Mitchell had been the most expensive mistake of his life. The girl he had dismissed as too simple, too ordinary, too poor to matter was about to show him exactly who she really was. And by the time she was finished, he would beg for forgiveness he would never receive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.